CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Russia's Wagner Group claims full control of the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut after months of bloody fighting, but Ukraine says they're still fighting on the ground. Our other headlines, Ukraine's president joins world leaders at the G7 summit. Ahead of his arrival, the US announces it will allow allies to send fighter jets to Kyiv. Candidates make their final pitches to voters ahead of Greek parliamentary elections. We'll be reporting on the issues that might decide the outcome. And breakdancing's breakout star, how this Chinese teenager is going for gold at next year's Paris Summer Olympics. Russia's armed mercenary force, the Wagner Group, claims it has captured the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. The group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said his soldiers had pushed Ukrainian forces out of the last built-up area of the city following months of intense fighting. But military chiefs in Kyiv deny those claims, saying its troops are still fighting in Bakhmut. If confirmed, it would be the first significant victory on the ground for Russia after 10 months of warfare that has left much of Bakhmut in ruins. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting world leaders at the G7 summit in Japan. Ahead of his arrival, the United States announced that it would allow allies to send fighter jets, including the F-16, to Ukraine. In a joint statement, the G7 pledged to support Kyiv for as long as it takes in the conflict with Russia. Leaders of 8 other of the world's biggest economies have joined the G7 talks in the city of Hiroshima, including Brazil, India and South Korea. Well, CGTN's correspondent Chris Gilbert in Tokyo says events in Ukraine continue to dominate the discussions.
Today was meant to be the day that we moved on to other events on the agenda of food security, AI, tech, all kinds of issues. Yesterday was a day that we really discussed, sanctions on Russia for the ongoing war in Ukraine at the G7 meeting. But yeah, the arrival of Volodymyr Zelensky in the country obviously overshadows everything. I'm getting notifications on my phone all the time from the press office about updates about the meetings and the projects and the events that are going on, but all the headlines are about Volodymyr Zelensky, and it seems to have even caught the Japanese officials a little bit on the hop as well. They weren't quite prepared. There are reports here that they had to scurry to prepare his security detail and all kinds of things here in Japan. And also another interesting point is that the joint communique, which is usually out on the last day, that was released, it seems, 24 hours early, and in a hurry. It's been revised twice since it was released, assuming that they believe that tomorrow here in Japan, Sunday the 3rd day, when Zelensky joins the roundtable discussions, that again he will dominate the news cycle and dominate the agenda.
8 other countries joining this summit, including some countries who haven't actually vocally backed the West's position and support of Ukraine. How might that affect the talks?
No, it's incredibly interesting, especially with China's BRICS partners, Brazil and India, here in attendance, although not South Africa, strangely enough, considering they're usually in attendance at G7 summits. It's interesting because Narendra Modi, the head of India, actually met with Volodymyr Zelensky today, and India is a country that is non-committal over the war. It is certainly a far cry from the G7's, quote, unwavering support for Ukraine. In fact, India imports from Russia surged by some 400% last year. So it's interesting to see him sit down with Volodymyr Zelensky today, and his message is that he views the war in Ukraine as a humanitarian issue more than a political one or an economic one, and that if Volodymyr Zelensky needs anything, he can reach out personally, but certainly a very hands-off approach from India, remaining non-committal over the conflict.
Chris, the Chinese Foreign Ministry just responding to a comment made at this meeting about its relations with Taiwan and other issues. Any word on what it said?
Yeah, I mean, it's responding to a raft of claims made by the G7 about China, especially in the joint communique about apparent and alleged economic coercion and other issues. I have some quotes here in front of me which are responding, say that the G7 talks about moving towards a peaceful world, but the G7 is actually the cause of global instability. The G7 also raised concerns in its view of human rights issues in China, and the statement reads that the internal affairs of China are effectively China's business, and it is not open to discussion or meddling from external forces. And the final thing is the G7 said that China could be a very good partner to cooperate with in the future, if it would behave responsibly. The response to that is that China is a responsible major country, firmly upholds the international system with the United Nations at its core. There's no response yet back from the G7 or any of those member countries, but that's the latest update.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has told a news conference that decisions by the G7 are aimed at what he called the double containment of Russia and China. He was reacting to that G7 statement that member countries had agreed to tighten sanctions against Moscow and reduce exposure to China.
We have entered a phase of fierce confrontation with an aggressive bloc comprised of the United States, the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance. The aim was to set out loudly and openly to defeat Russia on the battlefield and to not stop there, but to eliminate it as a geopolitical competitor. And any other country which aspires to have its own place in the world will also be suppressed as a competitor. Look at the decisions that are being discussed and adopted today in Hiroshima at the Summit of the Seven that are aimed at the double containment of Russia and the People's Republic of China.
Russia has also warned of colossal risks if F-16 fighter jets are sent to Ukraine. Moscow has accused the West of creating an escalation scenario that will prolong the fighting. Our correspondent Jasha Chernyshova is in Moscow.
Well, indeed, we've heard Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko today commenting on the issue of F-16 fighter jets deliveries to Ukraine. Now, he said the idea was running colossal risks, not just for the conflict, but also for those Western countries themselves. What he said was that the Western countries have chosen the track of escalatory rhetoric, and he said that they have been adhering to that for months now. Of course, he said that Russia would be taking into account all of the issues with regards to any arms deliveries to Ukraine. Moscow has repeatedly been saying that they have a tremendously negative attitude to any arms deliveries to Ukraine, saying that that would only mean that the conflict would last longer. But at the same time, we've heard Russia's spokesperson for the foreign ministry, Maria Zakharova, also saying that there is no way that Kiev could actually prove that they would not be using that against the Russian territory. She said, on the contrary, they do not believe those statements, and it was hypocritical of the United States to say that Kiev had made any promises. So all in all, Russia has been giving its negative attitudes to any arms deliveries to Ukraine, and this time is no exception, even though that's still an idea.
Another big story doing the rounds there, Russia banning 500 Americans, including the former President Barack Obama, from entering the country. What more can you tell us?
Well, indeed, Russian Foreign Minister of Friday has issued this statement saying that 500 Americans were banned from entering Russia. Now, Russia says that is in response to the repeatedly imposed anti-Russian sanctions by the United States of America. Now, this list includes some high-ranking and prominent names, including the former President Barack Obama, but also the people who Moscow says are related to Russophobia, spreading disinformation and fake information about Russia. These are also the heads of the companies that are producing weapons that are later being supplied to Ukraine. But also we've heard that Russia has once again denied the consular access to Evan Gershkovich, who has been arrested in Russia on espionage charges. And Moscow says that is also in response to the United States not issuing visas to the Russian journalists with who were traveling with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who were not able to get to the travel to New York in April. So Russia is saying that it is time that the U.S. changes its rhetoric and understands that Russia will be forced to react and to retaliate.
Well, Dr. Jamie Shea is Senior Fellow for Peace, Security and Defence at the Friends of Europe think tank. He explained the significance of the possible delivery of the F-16 jets to Ukraine.
It's a very significant step because one of the areas where Ukraine has been weak since it started to respond to the Russian invasion has been in the area, of course, of air superiority. And if you want to use tanks on the battlefield, as Ukraine is obviously planning to do for its spring offensive, we all know from the history of modern warfare that tanks only work really well when you have good air defense and air superiority. If you look at the conflict so far, Russia has lost about 2,000 tanks damaged or destroyed, an enormous number. And one of the reasons for that is Russia has not had air superiority. So I think that the US and many European countries are realizing that it doesn't make much sense to give all of this heavy armor if you don't help the Ukrainians with this air superiority picture. And the F-16 is probably the best multi-role type of aircraft that you can give to Ukraine at the present time.
The words are, in a sense, easy, aren't they? The promise of F-16 jets. What's more difficult is delivery and the physical delivery of arms to Ukraine. I mean, that hasn't been straightforward with past commitments, has it?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's one thing to begin the training, of course, and of course there's no sense in giving away tanks or sophisticated Patriot air defense systems or F-16s if the Ukrainians are not able to operate them. So beginning the training is a logical step, all the more so as, according to some US sources, it might take up to a year and a half to train the Ukrainian pilots. Others think that it can be done a lot faster. But this long training time obviously does give the European allies more time to look around and see who potentially could supply these F-16 jets. But in the case of the F-16s, it's going to be much harder than in the case of the tanks, and for two reasons. Number one, the Ukrainians have made it clear that they only want to operate the F-16, which is logical because, of course, these are expensive pieces of equipment with lots of spare parts, lots of maintenance, and so on. It doesn't make sense for the Ukrainians to try to operate 5 different types of modern fighter aircraft. But on the other hand, it complicates the situation, Jamie, because up until now, if you've looked at tanks, the Allies have given M1 Abrahams, Leopard 2s, British Challenger 2s, whatever they have available, which means that Ukraine gets something right away. But because the Ukrainians want only F-16s, it means that, for example, if the UK has got a couple of Tornado jets which are being decommissioned available, it can't give them to Ukraine because Ukraine wants F-16s. And some allies like Belgium and Poland have made it clear that at the moment they can participate in the training, but they don't think they have any spare F-16s to give away just yet. They need to keep their NATO commitments, Jamie. And secondly, many countries want to wait for the arrival of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighters that they've ordered before they consider that it's safe in the current strategic environment to part with those F-16s.
A pilot has survived an F-18 fighter jet crash during training at an Air Force base in northeastern Spain. The soldier managed to eject from the plane seconds before it crashed. He's been taken to hospital for treatment for his injuries. An investigation is now underway into the cause of the accident. The second round of talks between the White House and Republican congressional negotiators over raising the United States debt ceiling has ended in deadlock. The Treasury Department has warned the U.S. is at risk of being unable to pay its bills as soon as the 1st of June. President Biden says he believes that default will be avoided. Republicans are refusing to raise the government's borrowing limit unless spending cuts are agreed. Brittany Griner has returned to the basketball court for the first time since her high-profile prisoner exchange from Russia last year. Griner was welcomed on the court by United States Vice President Kamala Harris and cheering crowds. The athlete was detained for nearly 10 months after being taken into custody at Moscow airport and convicted of drugs charges. U.S. officials said she was wrongly detained. The countdown to Sunday's election in Greece has begun, with political leaders making their last pitch to win over undecided voters. The Greek Prime Minister is promising a more stable economy, while the opposition is calling for a more progressive administration. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas looks at some of the issues that might decide the outcome.
Everywhere you turn, posters, kiosks of political parties, and people trying to convince you who to cast your ballot for. Much has happened over the past few years, so let's break it down. First, the economy. When Prime Minister and leader of the conservative New Democracy Party, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, got elected in 2019, the country was still reeling from the financial crisis and unemployment was close to 18%. Today, that has dropped to 11%, a trend that could boost them in the ballots.
The country has been through a lot these past years, with the latest being the tragic train crash in Tempe and the pandemic. But concerning most Greeks is the economy. The growth over the past few years makes Greeks feel proud that they can have a better life, one that's closer to European standards. I believe that's what they'll think about when voting.
Another major event was the wiretapping scandal. Last July, it was revealed that the mobile phone of Nikos Androulakis, the leader of the Socialist PASOK party, was tapped by the secret services. The incident rocked the nation and also made international headlines. But according to opinion polls, the Prime Minister's popularity wasn't rocked at all.
In my opinion, it's a large issue rocking the foundations of our democracy. But if you translate it to the opinion polls and numbers, the Prime Minister's popularity stays the same. He didn't lose a single percentage point.
But he did lose after the deadly train crash in February, where a cargo and a passenger train collided near Tempe, leaving 57 people dead and another 50 injured. The majority of the victims were young people. It's the deadliest train crash in Greece's history. The Minister of Transportation resigned, and for the next month, thousands protested expressing their anger, putting a dent in Kyriakos Mitsotakis' image.
The train crash in Tempe shocked Greek society and created doubt over the government. It's the first time we saw a drop of 3 to 4 percentage points in opinion polls. The Prime Minister's popularity also dropped and his political decisions were questioned even more.
Hours before the polls open, Kyriakos Mitsotakis' party is estimated to win 36% of the votes ahead of opposition party leader Alexis Tsipras at 29.4%. Of course, all that can change after Sunday's elections, which is likely to pave the way for a second round of voting, since none of them seem to collect the 46% needed for a majority. But no matter who will be the country's next prime minister after years of economic turmoil, Greeks are eager for political stability. Evangelos Tsipsas for CGTN, Athens.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the heartbreaking story of the plane crash in the rainforest. Rescue crews in Colombia remain hopeful of finding 4 missing children. And from sales pitches to sailing competition, yachting's newest international regatta launches at the China Europe Expo.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Russia's Wagner Group claims full control of the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut after months of bloody battle, but Ukraine says they're still fighting. Ukraine's president joins world leaders at the G7 summit. Ahead of his arrival, the US announces it will allow allies to send fighter jets to Ukraine. And candidates make their final pitches to voters ahead of Greek parliamentary elections. Now, it could turn out to be a breathtaking story of survival against all the odds. Authorities in Colombia are looking for 4 children missing in the Amazon rainforest after their plane crashed 2 weeks ago. Traces of the children have been found. Search and rescue teams are hoping this means they could still be alive. 3 adults, including the pilot and the children's mother, died when the plane crashed. Our correspondent Michelle Beguet reports.
There is hope that 4 children survived a plane crash in the Colombian jungle. On May 1st, a plane crashed in the Amazon, transporting a mother and her 4 children, ages between 11 months to 13 years.
We would like to know where the children are. That is why there is a search, Operation Hope, that is shedding light on the situation. What we are doing here is bringing information, not dismissing any information, because that is our duty.
The remains of the pilot, co-pilot, and mother were found. Colombia's armed forces have spent more than 2 weeks searching for survivors. President Gustavo Petro says there is still no confirmation that the 4 children who were on the plane survived. But confusing reports have come out that they have been found by local indigenous communities. According to local child welfare officials, the Special Forces soldiers are searching for the children with rescue dogs and local indigenous communities. They have reportedly followed a trail of small objects such as hair scrunchies, plastic wrappings, and baby bottles. They have even found makeshift shelters and sticks and branches. Authorities say the biggest issue right now is logistics. The region is remote, it's hard to communicate in the jungle, and it has been raining.
There is hope of finding 4 minors at this moment. We will listen at every moment. In the jungle, there are voices, and those voices are heard. And when they are voices of children, they are heard with more intensity until they are verified.
Planes and helicopters have also been flying through the region, broadcasting a message from the grandmother, telling the children to stay in place. We will be following any updates. Michelle Beguet, CGTN, Valle del Cauca.
10,000 people have been forced out of their homes in Canada's Alberta province as wildfires ravage the community there. Nearly 3,000 firefighters have been battling to get the blaze under control, and there are fears the fires will spread as the weather is forecast to get drier and hotter. The authorities have closed parks and camping sites over the long Victoria Day weekend. And Spanish firefighters have been working overnight to try to control a forest wildfire that spread over nearly 8,000 hectares along with the border with Portugal. 3 villages have been evacuated. Last year, Spain saw more than 490 fires that destroyed thousands of hectares of land. China has begun to power its oil drilling platforms in the South China Sea by clean energy. The country's first deep-sea floating wind farm has been connected to the power grid in Hainan province. It's estimated that the new wind power platform will reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 22,000 tons a year. The China Central and Eastern European Expo has been concentrating on sales of goods and services between China and Europe, but it's sales of a different kind that rounded off the event in spectacular fashion with the launch of the Expo's first yachting contest. Our correspondent Wu Bin reports.
Yachting, or recreational sailing, is a relatively new sport in China, and Ningbo's vast natural resources make it an excellent place for it. In a bid to boost exchanges through this trendy sport, a regatta was held between China and Central and Eastern Europe. Behind me is Dongqian Lake, the largest freshwater lake in the province, and now it's become an ideal place to receive sailors from home and abroad. 22 teams, over 200 professional sailors gathered in Ningbo and will compete in the following 2 days. To help sailor athletes get used to the winds and the waters, the president of the Chinese Yachting Association led the teams for a sail before competition.
Today's wind is perfect. I'm happy that our athletes could compete in such good wind.
As the first such competition between China and the participating nations, the competition also serves as a platform for Ningbo to strengthen ties with its sister cities in Central and Eastern Europe.
From this perspective, I judge this as excellent event. Congratulations to dear friends in China, and I wish not only this event, but all the events you are organizing, and I'm sure it will be a lot of them, to be very successful.
The competition only has a small number of foreign competitors in its inaugural year, but the CYA president noted that this is a good start because it often takes years for a sporting event to become well known.
After this year's competition, I believe next year more foreign athletes will come to compete, and more people, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, will know about the event.
吴斌 CGTN 宁波浙江 Province.
Now, do you know your top rock from your down rock, your power moves from your freezes? Well, fans of breakdancing will know, and so might many more of us from next year when breakdancing is added to the list of sports at the Paris Summer Olympic Games. And one young Chinese B-girl, or breakdancer for those who are not familiar, is setting her sights on gold medals. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
They call her 671, but Chinese breakdance champion Yu Qingyi is proving herself to be far more than just 3 numbers. The 17-year-old sensation dazzled audiences in the French city of Montpellier this week, bagging her 2nd gold medal of the year, crushing Lithuania's Dominika Banovic, recently crowned European champion. Claiming the title in the World Dance Sport Federation Breaking for Gold World Series gives Liu valuable ranking points towards next summer's Olympic Games in Paris.
I wish that next year in Olympic Games I can win just like today. I will stay calm and not become arrogant and keep my cool and just keep on practicing.
And it is a case of practice makes perfect. The so-called B-girl from Henan province has shot to fame in just a year after winning back-to-back championships in her first 2 European competitions and a silver medal at the World Breaking Championships in South Korea.
The team is progressing enormously and in less than a year. Look, all these young artists, they lack experience, but today we can see that this lack of experience is being addressed with each event. It's the 4th final in a row and a 2nd gold medal. It's really great and we're really happy with it.
And it's a happy time to be in this game. Paris 2024 will be the first Olympics to feature breakdancing. Practitioners of this street dance, with its origins in African-American culture, know it requires athletic skills to match any urban sport.
Breakdancing is all about the relationship with the music. Not only are the moves difficult, but they also have to resonate with the music. The performance will also be affected by other factors like the audience, the venue, and even the stage lighting. You need to adjust your dance to the scene and the atmosphere.
At its Paris debut next year, there will be 2 individual competitions for men and women respectively, each seeing 16 breakers battle it out, with a spectacular face-to-face solo duel to determine the gold in both categories. 671 will be hoping her numbers stay lucky. Paul Barber, CGTN.
The headlines again. Russia's Wagner Group claims full control of the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut after months of bloody battle. But Ukraine denies those claims and says while the situation is critical, they're still fighting. Ukraine's president joins world leaders at the G7 summit. Ahead of his arrival, the US announces it'll allow allies to send fighter jets to Ukraine. And candidates make their final pitches to voters ahead of Greek parliamentary elections. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. More news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, from all of us on the news team, it's goodbye.